Nobody in that ballroom clapped for Adeyemi. 300 people watched Nikki's hand connect with his face, and not one of them reached for their phone to call security. They reached for their champagne. Because in that room, a wife slapping her husband wasn't an assault. It was a punchline. Victor laughed loud enough that the string quartet actually stopped playing. Here's the part nobody in that room understood yet. Adeyemi had signed the paperwork the day before. Not divorce paperwork. Something far more permanent for the two people currently enjoying his humiliation. But we'll get to that. 24 hours is a long time to pretend you don't own the room you're standing in. Let's start with why a man worth more than everyone in that ballroom combined was wearing a suit that cost less than the ice sculpture. The chandelier over the Apex Holdings ballroom threw gold light across 400 faces, and every one of them turned toward Adeyemi at the exact moment Nikki's palm cracked against his cheek. The sound traveled. It bounced off the marble underfoot, off the wall of windows overlooking the Charlotte skyline, off champagne flutes frozen halfway to open mouths. For a room built to host mergers and retirement toasts, it wasn't built for this kind of noise, and it didn't know what to do with it. Adeyemi's head turned with the blow. He let it. His jaw ached where her ring had caught the edge of his cheekbone, and warmth trickled toward his collar, thin and quick. Somewhere behind him, a woman gasped, the way people do when they've just watched something they'll describe differently by morning. He didn't turn to find her. He kept his eyes on Nikki instead, on the yellow silk trembling at her shoulders, on the fury stitched across a face he'd watched sleep beside him for 6 years. She wasn't looking at him like a wife. She was looking at him like a problem she'd finally solved. Behind her, Victor's laugh rolled out low and delighted, his emerald jacket catching the light every time his shoulders shook. He had the look of a man who'd been waiting all night for a moment exactly like this one, and now that it had arrived, he intended to enjoy it slowly, the way some men enjoy a good scotch. "There it is," Victor said, "to no one and everyone. Finally." Adeyemi said nothing. The quiet unsettled the room more than the slap had. A husband was supposed to shout, or leave, or beg, something loud enough to match the moment. Instead, he stood there, in a suit the color of a Tuesday, blood inching toward his collar, and simply breathed. In, out, like a man waiting for a train he already knew the schedule of. Nikki's hand was still raised, hovering, as if she expected him to react and hadn't planned for what happened when he didn't. "Say something," she said. Her voice cracked at the edges. Not from guilt, he understood now, but from the effort of performing rage she didn't entirely feel. "Adeyemi, say something." He touched 2 fingers to his jaw, studied the blood on them like it belonged to someone else. "I already have," he said quietly. "You'll hear it in 3 minutes." Somewhere near the bar, a glass caught the light and glittered gold, unnoticed. Victor's laughter faltered, just slightly, just enough. Nikki's raised hand finally lowered, and across the ballroom, near the entrance no one had been watching, the legal counsel he'd flown in from New York checked her watch and began walking toward the podium. 1 week earlier, the view from the 40th floor showed Atlanta at dusk, all amber light pooling along the interstates, like something poured rather than built. Adeyemi stood at the window of his private office, the one with no nameplate on the door, the one his own employees didn't know he owned, and watched the traffic crawl while his lawyers argued over an easement clause behind him. "The Hendricks Group wants 48 hours to counter," said Tricia, his lead counsel, sliding a folder across the conference table. "They think Apex is worth more than we're offering." "They're wrong," Adeyemi said, not turning from the window. "Apex is bleeding talent in its marketing division. Nikki's the only reason client retention hasn't collapsed already. That's the whole valuation." Tricia raised an eyebrow. She'd worked with him for 6 years and had learned to hear the difference between his business voice and the other one, the one that showed up whenever his wife's name entered a boardroom. "You could just tell her," she said. "Skip all this. I want her to walk into her own building one morning and find out she owns it." He finally turned, and there was something almost boyish in the way he said it, a softness that never once showed up in the mid-level auditor role he wore. like a second skin at Apex. 12 years of nobody knowing my name outside a handful of people. I don't need my name on this. I need her name on the door. It wasn't sentiment for its own sake. Adeyemi had built Orion-adjacent ventures across 3 states, a logistics firm in Ohio, a biotech incubator outside Austin, a controlling stake in a Nevada data center, always from behind proxy boards and shell entities, always trading visibility for leverage. Apex Holdings would be different. Apex was personal. Apex was the company that had hired his wife as a mid-level strategist 8 years ago, and had spent every year since underpaying her, overlooking her, and promoting men half as capable. He intended to walk in on their anniversary and hand her the whole building like a bouquet. The final signature page sat waiting in a leather folio on the table, needing only Trisha's counter-signature and a wire transfer scheduled for Thursday morning. $210 million, rooted through a Delaware holding company, about to make his wife the sole controlling owner of record. Quietly, structurally, the moment the ink dried. "There's one more thing," Trisha said, hesitating in a way she rarely did. Standard due diligence flagged some irregular file traffic on the Apex servers. Probably nothing. Internal messaging, mostly executive level. Adeyemi barely looked up from the folio. "Flag it for review after close." He had no idea, signing his name below hers that evening, that the file waiting in that irregular traffic had his own name buried somewhere inside it. Waiting, patient, for a tablet sync he hadn't scheduled and couldn't yet imagine. The notification came through at 11:42 on a Tuesday night. Small and unremarkable. The kind of thing a person swipes away without reading. Adeyemi almost did. He was in the kitchen of their Buckhead townhouse, pouring the last of a bottle of water into a glass, still dressed in the grey slacks and quarter-zip he wore to blend into Apex's mid-level ranks by day. His tablet sat charging on the counter beside a bowl of untouched fruit. When Nikki had upgraded her phone that morning, the 2 devices had linked through some backup setting neither of them remembered enabling years ago. An old shared iCloud folder from their engagement, back when they'd trusted each other with everything, including passwords. The screen lit up. 47 new items synced to shared memories. He tapped it out of habit more than curiosity. What loaded wasn't wedding photos. It was a folder, labeled simply V, and inside it, months of messages stacked like sediment, one on top of another, each one a small excavation into a life he hadn't known he was living beside. "He actually thinks I'm proud of him," one message read, time-stamped from a Tuesday 3 weeks back. "It's almost sad." Another, from Nikki, to a contact saved only as a single letter, "Same suit he wore to my sister's wedding. I could die." Adeyemi's thumb kept moving before his mind caught up to what it was reading. The kitchen was quiet, except for the hum of the refrigerator, and, somewhere outside, a car alarm chirping twice down the block. He became aware of both sounds distantly, the way a person notices weather through a window. There were voice notes, too. He hesitated over one, then pressed it anyway. Nikki's voice, laughing, unmistakably hers, warmer than he'd heard it in months, just not toward him. "Victor, I swear, if he asks me one more time about company culture, I'm going to scream. He genuinely thinks staying at the same level for 6 years is some kind of loyalty. It's not loyalty. It's just nothing. He's nothing." The glass in his hand had gone warm from his grip. He didn't drop it, didn't throw it. He set it down on the counter with a care that surprised him, the way a man sets down something he suspects he'll need steady hands for later. Upstairs, the shower shut off. In a few minutes, Nikki would come down in the robe he'd bought her in Savannah 2 anniversaries ago, ask what he wanted for dinner, kiss his cheek like nothing in the folder existed. Adeyemi looked at the closing date on the Apex acquisition, still glowing faintly in a separate tab. Thursday. 3 days from now, he would own the company that employed both his wife and her lover. He closed the folder. He did not close the feeling underneath it. He didn't sleep that night, though he let Nikki believe he had. She'd come down in the Savannah robe just as he'd known she would, asked about dinner, mentioned an early morning meeting with Victor about the Midwest campaign rollout. Adeyemi had answered in the right places. Yes to takeout. Sure, Thai again. Fine. He'd walk the dog before bed. His voice did all the things a voice was supposed to do, and none of it touched the part of him currently rebuilding itself from the floor up in the kitchen 40 minutes earlier. By 2 in the morning, lying beside her, breathing in the dark of their bedroom, he understood something had shifted permanently, the way a foundation shifts after an earthquake. Not visibly, not right away, but everything built on top of it would eventually show the crack. He thought of his grandmother in Lagos, who used to say grief and rage were cousins that never got along, but always showed up to the same funeral. He hadn't understood that as a boy. He understood it now, lying still, listening to the woman he'd built an empire around, dream peacefully beside the wreckage. By sunrise, he'd made a decision, and it arrived not as an explosion, but as something closer to arithmetic. He called Trisha at 6:15, before Nikki stirred. "Don't cancel Thursday," he said, standing on the back porch in the grey half-light, the Georgia humidity already thick against his collar. "You still want to close?" Trisha's voice carried the particular caution of someone who'd read between enough lines in her career to know when a client's tone had changed shape overnight. "Adeyemi, are you all right?" "I want to close," he said, "but the structure changes. I don't want a silent stake anymore. I want full operational control, effective immediately at signing. Board seats, termination authority, everything routed through me directly, not through proxies." A pause on the line. "That's not a gift anymore. That's a takeover." "It was always going to be a takeover," Adeyemi said, watching a hawk circle low over the neighbor's magnolia tree. "I just used to think I was taking it over for her." He didn't tell Trisha about the folder, didn't tell her about Victor, or the voice note, or the 6 years reduced to a single contemptuous word. That kind of information wasn't for lawyers yet. It was for the gala, for a room full of witnesses, for a moment he intended to build with the same patience he'd once built Orion, brick by brick, quietly, until the day someone looked up and realized the entire structure already belonged to him. Nikki wanted a company. Fine. She was about to get one, and everyone standing beside her when she did. The suit had been hanging in the closet for 3 years, a navy 2-piece Adeyemi bought off the rack in a hurry before a cousin's funeral. Forgettable in every way a suit could be forgettable. He took it out that evening and laid it across the bed like it mattered, because tonight, for the first time, it did. "You're not seriously wearing that," Nikki said from the bathroom doorway, fastening an earring, already glowing in the yellow dress she'd had altered twice that month. "It's the Apex Gala, Adeyemi. Half the board will be there. Investors, probably some names from New York. It's fine," he said. "Nobody's looking at me. That's not the point." She stepped into the bedroom, heels in hand, the kind of frustration in her voice that had become so familiar over the last year, he barely registered it as unusual anymore. "I need tonight to go well. Victor's finally putting me forward for the VP track, and if I show up with you, looking like you're heading to a DMV appointment, I won't embarrass you," he said, and meant it in a way she couldn't possibly understand yet. "You don't have to come at all." She said it lightly, testing the weight of it, the way she'd started saying things lately, soft enough to walk back, sharp enough to land. "It's mostly work people. You'd probably have a terrible time. I want to come." He buttoned the jacket, checked himself in the mirror over the dresser. Plain, unremarkable, exactly as intended. "It's important to you. That makes it important to me." Something crossed her face then, quick and irritated, gone before he could name it. Not affection. Something closer to inconvenience. "Fine," she said. "Just try not to talk business with anyone. You wouldn't really understand half of it anyway." He almost laughed. He didn't. Instead, he thought of the folio sitting in Trisha's office downtown. Signed, sealed, effective as of 11 that morning. Apex Holdings. Every share, every vote, every hiring and firing decision, now routed through a name none of the 400 guests tonight would recognize. He thought of Victor's emerald jacket, already pressed and hanging somewhere across town, and the voice note that still played sometimes behind his eyes when the house went quiet. He straightened his tie in the mirror, plain navy against a plain white shirt, and studied the man looking back at him, a man about to walk into a room full of people who believed they understood exactly what he was worth. "You're right," he said quietly. "I probably won't understand half of it." Nikki didn't hear the second meaning. She rarely did anymore. She grabbed her clutch, checked her lipstick once more in the hallway mirror, and called over her shoulder that the car was waiting outside. Adeyemi followed her out the door, dressed exactly as he intended to be underestimated. If you are enjoying this story, kindly hit the subscribe button now, and like. The Apex Holdings Gala filled the top 2 floors of a downtown Atlanta hotel, all glass and gold light spilling out over Peachtree Street, valets ushering town cars up to a red carpet that seemed excessive for a marketing firm's annual dinner. Adeyemi walked 3 steps behind Nikki, unnoticed by the photographers stationed near the entrance, exactly as he'd planned. Inside, the ballroom hummed with the particular energy of people who believed they were the most important guests in any room they entered. String lights threaded the ceiling. A jazz trio worked through something low and unobtrusive near the bar, barely audible over the layered chatter and the clink of glasses being refilled by servers in black vests. Nikki found Victor within 90 seconds. Adeyemi watched it happen from a few feet back, a glass of untouched, sparkling water in his hand, invisible in the way only a plain navy suit could make a man invisible in a room built for peacocks. Victor stood near the center of the floor in his green jacket, holding court with 3 board members and a woman Adeyemi recognized as a reporter from a regional business journal. He laughed, loudly at something he'd said himself, the sound carrying. "There she is," Victor said, opening an arm as Nikki approached, and she slid into the space beside him, like she'd rehearsed the motion. "Tell them what I told you about the Midwest numbers." Nikki lit up in a way Adeyemi hadn't seen directed at him in longer than he wanted to admit. She launched into the campaign figures fluently, confidently, her hand resting on Victor's forearm the entire time, an intimacy so casual it had clearly stopped feeling like a secret to either of them. Nobody introduced Adeyemi. He stood at the edge of the circle for a long moment, close enough to hear every word, invisible enough that a board member actually reached past him for a canapé without registering he was a person and not a waiter. "And your husband?" the reporter asked eventually, glancing toward him with polite obligation. "What is it you do?" "Internal audit," Adeyemi said simply. "Process review, mostly." "Ah." The reporter's attention slid off him instantly, back toward Victor, who was already mid-sentence about a vision for scalable growth that Adeyemi happened to know was borrowed almost word for word from a Nevada logistics firm he quietly controlled. Nikki didn't look back at him once. Adeyemi took a slow sip of his water and let his eyes move across the room instead. The caterers, the ice sculpture melting faster than the schedule allowed, the legal counsel he'd flown in from New York, standing near a side door in a gray suit, glancing at her watch with the patience of someone who already knew exactly how the night would end. Somewhere near the stage, a microphone stand was being tested by a sound technician, one soft tap after another, counting down to something none of them could hear yet. By the time dinner service ended, Victor had gathered a small crowd near the terrace doors, the kind of audience he seemed to collect, the way other men collected watches. Adeyemi found himself pulled into it without meaning to, Nikki's hand looping through his elbow for appearances only, her attention already drifting back to Victor before the introduction finished. "Internal audit," Victor repeated, tasting the words like something slightly off. He turned to the board members flanking him, a silver-haired man from the Chicago office, a woman Adeyemi recognized as an outside director recently added for compliance optics. "You know what's funny? I've been VP for 4 years and I don't think I've ever met the internal audit team. Do you even have an office? Or do they just give you a cubicle near the copier?" Laughter rippled through the small circle. Nikki's laugh came a half-second after everyone else's, thin and obligatory, her eyes flicking to Victor rather than to her husband. "Cubicle's fine," Adeyemi said mildly. "Good light in the mornings, I bet." Victor's smile widened, sensing an opening, the way certain men always did when they mistook silence for surrender. 6 years at the same level, though. That's a long time to enjoy good light. Some people call that loyalty. I call it a ceiling. "Victor," Nikki murmured, though not with much conviction. "I'm just saying." Victor spread his hands, playing to the board members now more than to Adeyemi at all. "Some of us are built to climb. Some of us are built to hold the door open for people who climb. Nothing wrong with knowing which one you are." The circle waited for Adeyemi to shrink, to laugh along, to do whatever quiet men were supposed to do when a louder man cornered them at a party. Instead, Adeyemi took a slow breath and let his eyes move, unhurried, toward the silver-haired director from Chicago. "Speaking of climbing," he said, voice even, almost bored, "did the Midwest Division ever explain the 11% client attrition from last quarter? I only ask because internal audit flagged it in March. Nobody's addressed it publicly yet." The terrace went quiet, in a way the whole party hadn't been quiet all evening. Victor's smile stayed fixed, but something behind his eyes recalculated. That's being handled internally." "Good to hear," Adeyemi said, "since it's currently the department's biggest liability heading into next quarter's board review." The outside director's gaze sharpened, no longer polite, now genuinely interested. "I hadn't seen that figure. It's in the March report," Adeyemi said simply, and let the silence do the rest of the work. Nikki's hand had gone still on his arm. For the first time all night, she was looking at him, not with warmth, but with something closer to confusion, as if a piece of furniture had just spoken fluent French. Victor's laugh, when it came, was a half-beat too late, and nowhere near as loud as before. The silence lasted only a few seconds before Victor filled it the way he filled every silence, with volume. "Interesting," he said, recovering his smile, though it sat differently on his face now, tighter at the edges. "Didn't realize the copier room came with opinions." He turned to the board members, spreading his hands like a man asking a jury for patience. "You see what I mean? This is exactly the kind of undermining energy that—" "Nobody's undermining anything," Adeyemi said. "I answered a question about a report that already exists. You made me look unprepared in front of the board." Victor's voice had dropped its charm entirely now, something harder showing underneath, the way a coat of paint sometimes reveals rust once it's scratched. "In front of my board, at my company's own gala." "It's not your company," Adeyemi said quietly. Technically, he hadn't meant to say it yet. It slipped out anyway, small and true, and it landed somewhere in Victor's expression, like a splinter working its way to the surface. Victor didn't understand it. Not yet, but he understood insult, and he understood audience, and by now half the terrace had turned to watch, drinks forgotten, the jazz trio's slow number suddenly the only sound filling the gaps between words. "Nikki!" Victor's voice sharpened, aimed sideways now instead of forward. "Handle your husband!" The word landed strangely. Handle. Like Adeyemi was a spreadsheet error, a scheduling conflict, something requiring correction before the evening could continue. Nikki's hand slid off his arm. For a moment, just a moment, something flickered across her face that might have been hesitation. Adeyemi saw it, and some small, stubborn part of him reached for it, the way a person reaches for a memory of who someone used to be. Then Victor said her name again, low, almost bored, the way a man speaks to something he already owns, and Nikki's hand moved before her face caught up to it. The slap cracked across the terrace, loud enough to silence the trio mid-phrase, loud enough that a passing server nearly dropped a tray of champagne flutes. Adeyemi's head snapped sideways, heat blooming instantly along his cheekbone, the taste of copper rising faint at the corner of his mouth. For one full second, nobody moved. Then Victor's laugh broke the stillness, loud and delighted, rolling out across the terrace like he'd been waiting all night for exactly this. Around them, 400 faces turned toward the sound, some gasping, some reaching for phones, all of them witnessing what they believed was the quiet unraveling of a forgettable man. Adeyemi lifted his head slowly. Blood traced a thin line toward his collar. He looked at Nikki first, then past her, toward the small woman in grey, already crossing the ballroom floor with quiet, unhurried steps, folder in hand, watch checked one final time. 3 minutes, he thought, right on schedule. Adeyemi wiped the blood from his jaw with 2 fingers and walked toward the podium. Nobody stopped him. Nobody quite believed he would reach it. The sound technician's earlier taps had prepared the microphone perfectly, and when Adeyemi tapped it once himself, the small thud rolled out across the ballroom, loud enough to still the last of the murmuring. 400 faces turned again, this time with confusion instead of delight. "Good evening," Adeyemi said. His voice carried, calm and unhurried, nothing like the voice of a man who'd been struck 90 seconds earlier. "Most of you don't know my name. That's about to change." Trisha stepped up beside him, folder open, and behind her, the grey-suited woman from New York, legal counsel, Adeyemi's own, took her place near the screen at the edge of the stage. "As of 11 this morning," Adeyemi continued, "Apex Holdings and all its subsidiary assets transferred to Meridian Point Holdings, effective immediately at signing. I am the sole controlling owner of record." A ripple moved through the crowd, board members exchanging glances, a reporter's pen already moving. "Victor," Adeyemi said, and for the first time all night, he let himself look directly at the man in the green jacket, whose laughter had gone somewhere quiet and small. "Your department's 11% client attrition wasn't the only irregularity flagged in March. There's also a pattern of expense reports routed through a marketing subcontractor in Nevada that doesn't appear to exist. Legal will be in touch by morning. Your position is terminated, effective tonight." Victor opened his mouth. Nothing useful came out of it. "Security will help you locate your coat," Adeyemi added, not unkindly, though the words carried no warmth either. He turned, finally, toward Nikki. She stood exactly where she'd struck him, the yellow dress suddenly looking less like triumph and more like a costume she hadn't chosen carefully enough. 6 years, Adeyemi said quietly, quiet enough that the room leaned in to hear it. "You thought you were embarrassed by a nobody. You weren't. You were married to the man who just bought the floor you're standing on." He nodded, and the legal counsel stepped forward with a second folder. "This isn't a termination notice, though it will function like one. It's divorce paperwork. I had it drafted the same week I had the acquisition drafted. I suppose I built both gifts around the same anniversary." Nikki didn't reach for the folder. Her hand, the one that had struck him, hung useless at her side. Somewhere near the terrace doors, a single champagne glass slipped from someone's fingers and shattered against the marble, the sound sharp and final in a room that had gone otherwise silent. Adeyemi straightened his jacket, touched the blood at his jaw one last time, and walked away from the podium exactly as he'd arrived. Unremarkable, unhurried, and, for the first time all night, completely, permanently seen. If you enjoyed this story, kindly hit the subscribe button. I post new stories every day.